Hello students, welcome back to the Analyst for 24th April 2024, where we will be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. The very first article today will be on the recent state of economy in India, and this is following the recent RBI's circular. In the next one, we'll be looking at a very important piece of editorial in the Indian Express on the left-wing extremism in the country. In the third article, we'll be looking at a very important scheme known as Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, that is urban scheme. And in the fourth article, we'll be looking at a concept known as a linkage coal and also about the issues in the coal sector in the country. And in the fifth article, we'll be looking at the state of the climate in Asia 2023, following a very important report on the recent climatic events taking place in the country and in Asia. And finally, to wrap up the session, we'll be covering some important prelims information from prelims examination point of view to cover the news in shorts and prepare you for the upcoming prelims examination. So let's begin. So students, will be starting our very first article. This is looking at the RBI's State of Economy report in its circular, and monthly RBI releases its monthly bulletin, and it is also very important for your side, from your side, to understand the various important terms, various data in the same. So in this article, we'll be looking at the various trends, the various highlights on the status of both global economy and the Indian economy, and I guarantee that you will not be finding such content anywhere. Now, the context is that recently the RBI warned in its recent bulletin of March that the food inflation and also the various extreme weather events and also the amount of geopolitical issues which is going on in the global stage, they will be having a bearing on the overall Indian economy status. Now, it is a very important topic for your UPSC prelims, particularly because we have economic and social development, and also from GS3, where we have the issues of Indian economy related to the various aspects of planning of the country and the mobilization of resources and so on. Now, starting the very first article, and here we find that we have to first look at the global imperatives and the global economic conditions as of now. Now, the recent bulletin of the RBI, it has quoted the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. The IMF recently has raised a concern that the global economy will be slowing down and also will be having a growth rate of around 3.2%. And here we have to understand, when we talk about the global growth, we are talking about the global economies and their growth, right? So individually, if we take the sum total of all the economic, say, parameters of growth, such as GDP, and average it, or say divide it by the number of nations, we get the global economic growth. And for that, the IMF has given a forecast that the economic growth globally will be 3.2%, and this is at a very slower pace compared to the levels which we saw before the pandemic times, or say before 2019. And here the IMF is also telling that over a period of time, this growth will definitely be picking up, because we have some reasons for the same. The very first reason is that the consumer sentiments, or simply we can tell the consumer demand for various goods and services in the markets, they're improving globally over a period of time. The second reason is that the inflationary pressures, particularly after the COVID pandemic, right, and also the slowly opening up of the economy after the subsequent lockdowns in the various nations, due to that, the inflation was in place from around 2020, 21 and 2023. And from 2024 onwards, the report is telling that we can expect a slowdown in the inflation. And that is why the inflationary pressures is actually right now, a notch below the last year. And obviously, when we look at the employment conditions in the global economy is also improving over a period of time. Now, this bulletin has also given us a very important source of data here, and the same thing which we have discussed right now, we can see the global economy is projected to grow at 3.2%. And when we talk about the nations, we can divide it economically into advanced economies such as the nations of US, UK, Euro and Japan, right? And also the emerging economies such as Brazil, India, China and so on. So we can see among the emerging economics, emerging market economies in the world, we see that the Indian economy is actually the fastest growing economy, not only between the emerging economies but also between the advanced economies too. And here we can see that most of the advanced economies, particularly the UK and the US, their growth projections over the next year, that is even up to 2025, is not that strong. But when we look at the same condition in India, we see that India's projection is always at 6.5% plus, and that is a very, very good indicator for the country too. And when we look at the other kind of detailed data here, firstly we have to look at the global supply chain. And when we are talking about the supply chain, we are talking about the distribution of the goods and services that is exported and imported between various nations using various modes of transportation, and also the various modes of transportation, and also the amount of infrastructure that is used to import and export such items, right? So within the same, we can understand that the global supply chain and the index related to the same, right, that is actually declining recently as of now. Right, so it is implying that there are some issues which is actually impacting the supply chain issues. One of the most important issues are the global conflicts that are taking place all around the world, particularly in Russia, Ukraine, in the Israeli nations, right, in the regions surrounding Israel. So this is why the global supply chain is a little bit impacted. Next, also when we look at the geopolitical risk indicator, we find that the geopolitical risks coming from the various international conflicts, it is also at a all-time high. In fact, we can see that the risks are declining as of now recently, but we see over a long-term average, right, over a long-term average, the risks are still very high right now. And when we look at the GE World Container Index, which actually looks at the usage or the number of frequency of usage of containers or shipping containers, we find that recently, as of say the last few months, we see that the world shipping is actually on a decline. After seeing a major improvement, right, from around November 2023. So within the same, we find that this is the temporary volatility that is actually always prevalent in the world trade. Now we have to look at the Indian economic status right now. Now when we look at the bulletin, the RBI's bulletin is always a very, very beautiful piece of information where we get a lot of data. So we have to look at the some aspect of the data. Now when we look at the GDP actual and the nowcast, right, or when we talk about nowcast, it means that we are talking about the present economic conditions. Now RBI has projected that the economy will be growing at around 7% in 2024-2025 financial year, and this is a very, very strong amount of economic growth that will be taking place. When we look at the labor market conditions, we find that the all India unemployment levels is actually coming down recently, and it is at 7.6%. And when we look at both the urban and rural unemployment rates, we find that the urban unemployment rate is actually higher than the rural unemployment rate. And these are all the important pieces of data that you definitely need to note down to quote in your mains answers. And RBI's bulletin is a very, very credible source to refer apart from the economic service too. And here, when we look at the other kind of employment situation, we find that the labor force participation rate in the country is at 41.1%, followed by the employment rate, which is at 37.9%. Then when we look at the recent exports data in the country, right, we also covered this in the previous analyst sessions. We saw in that session that the trade deficit is actually decreasing over a period of time. This is because our exports, right, and imports, these conditions have improved. That means our imports have reduced by more, right, than the decrease in the exports. And this is also seen in this particular graph here, where the black dotted line is actually showing you the trade deficit, which is coming down. And when we are talking about it is coming down, it means that India's trade balance with the rest of the world, it is improving. And also when we look at the expenditure trends of the government of India, now we know that in budget we divide our expenditures into revenue expenditures and capital expenditures. Revenue expenditure is the expenditure on day-to-day items such as giving subsidies to the people, paying salaries to the government employees. And capital expenditure is actually the money that is spent on roads, airports, schools and colleges, that is actually building tangible assets and intangible assets for the country. So we can see as of recent years, right, if we start looking at the same from 2015-16 to the the last financial year 2023-24, we saw that the amount of capital expenditure that is spent by the government of India has increased, right? And at least over the last 3 financial years, it is consistently increasing. Now, when we have to look at the various amount of risks that the report is talking about India, we have to see the risks through the lens of inflation. Now, we know that inflation is a phenomenon where we see the general price of various goods and services, they rise persistently over a period of time in a particular country. Now, we see that the inflation and the risks to inflation that is in the near term are generally of 3 reasons. Firstly, it is of the inherent nature of the inflation itself. For example, the prices of goods and services themselves. And here when we are talking about the prices, we have to talk about the trends also. So let us look at the CPI inflation recently. Now see, over a period of time, right, over the last year's March to, around 2022 March, right? So if we look at the past 2 years, inflation has remained consistently high when we look at the consumer price index, right? So it has been remaining very, very high. And recently, as we talk about, going into 2024 March, we see that the inflation is actually easing or coming down. But when we look at the inflation components, right, we know that CPI is composed of food and beverages, fuel and light, and the various other goods and services. We see that the food inflation, or the green candle here, the food inflation is still high in the country while the overall inflation is actually low, right? But we can understand that a major component of the inflation in the country is attributable to food and fuel inflation, and mostly important here is the food condition, because we have to understand, particularly during summer months as of now in 2024, we know that the heat is on, right? The game is on and the heat is on, and that is why the amount of weather impacts on the agriculture commodities, it can be also very, very profound. And that is why the risks of crop failures in this intense summer heat across the nations are also very high. And if the crops fail in the country, we can see that the supply of the commodities, of the food commodities, will be coming down, while the demand will be, say, remaining same, or it can even fluctuate. But we have to understand the supply of food items will be coming down due to any extreme weather events such as heat waves or, say, intense rainfalls and so on. And this is one reason why the government of India needs a very careful monitoring, and also the Reserve Bank of India needs to look at the price trends and be very, very careful about inflationary conditions. And here there is a relief that this year IMD, the Indian Meteorological Department, the prime nodal authority for weather related forecasts in the country, it's recently told that in the coming months, that is from June, India will be having a normal, or say above normal, southwest monsoon. So it is coming as a relief, but again the risks are still there. And here when we talk about the extreme weather events, as you can see here in this chart was there in the RBI bulletin. So probability forecast of maximum temperatures, you can see all across the country, is remaining above normal, and are also most of the country right now, according to various reports, is actually prone to heat waves. And the same is also shown in the World Meteorological Organization State of Global Climate 2023 report that we'll be also covering in the later articles here. So we can see the risks coming from here. In this report, it has been told that in 2024, Asia will be breaching the historic records when we talk about temperatures. And finally, inflation can also come from prolonged geopolitical tensions, primarily in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, primarily also between Israel and the various other Gulf nations, and this can potentially destabilize the global supply chain. And this is also a risk where inflation, particularly inflation in fuel, crude oil, this can take place. And here there are some other observations, is that the bulletin has advised the Indian authorities and the government that Indian economy must be growing at the rate of 8 to 10% per annum in real terms. And this should be over the next 10 years to actually reap India's demographic dividend. And this is actually referring to a condition when most of the country's population is actually in a very stable working condition age. And that is why we have to understand that the country has to extract the maximum amount of potential when we talk about economic potential from its young and rising labor population. So that is why this demographic dividend window is open in India, was actually open since 2018, and it will be lasting till 2040. 55 according to RBI's internal calculations. So between this time, India has to focus a lot on improving the education scenario in the country, on improving the health scenario in the country, on improving the skilling ecosystem, right? So these three parameters must be focused on, and also this has been focused by the RBI in this latest bulletin. And finally, according to Asian Development Bank, there is a resurgence of private sector investment apart from the public investment too. Now this has been attributed generally to three reasons. Firstly, that we had seen recently a growing domestic demand from Indians themselves of the various goods and services. That is why the private sector is also interested to invest and expand their businesses. Next, we find that the government of India is also focusing more on capital expenditure, as we have seen in the previous charts also. And these infrastructure, such as building more roads, more railways, better ports, better highways, better airports. So this is actually attracting a lot of private investments, which is also known as crowding in of public investment. That is, firstly the government has to build some tangible infrastructure, then the private infrastructure will be capitalizing on the same. So we are seeing the crowding in aspect is increasing on the front of increasing private investments in the country. And finally, we see companies such as Reliance, such as Adani and various other companies, they are showing improved amount of credit ratings when it comes to the companies taking loans from the banks. So their credit ratings over a period of time, they are also improving, and that is why they're also taking more loans from domestic banks and also from international banks, and they're expanding business. And this is all the things that you need to know from this article here. In the next article, we'll be looking at a very, very important piece of a particular topic in our mains from GS3, known as the role of non-state actors in creating challenges to internal security, because this article is totally focusing on the left-wing extremism in the country. And the context is, as recently the security forces have dealt a decisive blow to the Maoists on 14th April in Kanker, Chhattisgarh. And here they killed almost around 20 to 30 Maoists, and the authorities, they have also seized various weapons, explosives from these groups. Now let us understand the issue, firstly through understanding some very basic origin story of the left-wing extremism in the country. Now see, when we talk about left-wing insurgency, we have to first define the term. See, insurgency refers to a particular armed conflict or armed movement, armed revolution by the people of the country themselves to totally overthrow the democratic institutions of the country via, firstly, say, peaceful means, and mostly via violent means. And when we talk about violent means, we talk about using guns against our own country. And that is why we have to understand that the government of India is particularly very, very vigilant across all the insurgencies which is happening around the country here. Now, left-wing extremism is exactly the same thing that is taking place in insurgency. That is, it is an armed rebellion against the state, and here the people of the country themselves are going arms against the state, and also it is a violent rebellion. But here, left-wing, when we are including this word with insurgency, it means that this insurgency has some ideological preferences, some radical preferences on the mode of insurgency. So to understand this, we need to look a little at our history here. Now, in 1967, the main issue started at Naxalbari in West Bengal. Naxalbari is a place in West Bengal, is a village in West Bengal where this movement started, primarily when the local peasants there, the landless peasants there, they moved against violently the landowners. They brutally suppressed the landowners and they took away their belongings, and possibly they also killed many landowners in the region. And the prime motive of going against or moving against the landowners was actually a particular history of exploitation that the landless laborers they have faced over a period of time. And here, this person, this individual that we can see in this picture, Chadu Majumdar, was a pivotal figure in this entire movement. Chadu Majumdar belonged to that class of the population, of the political population, who believes in the idea of left-wing extremism. And this left-wing extremism has its origin in China under Mao Zedong, and Chadu Majumdar was also a very ardent follower of Mao Zedong in China. And also Chadu Majumdar organized the group of people who were rebelling against the landowners and transformed that rebellion into an ideological struggle against the state of, which we can also term as an insurgency against the state by using the communist ideology here. And the communist ideology particularly tells that the people themselves has to rise firstly peacefully against the state to meet their demands, and if the state is not meeting the demands, they have to rise with arms against the state. And this is where Chadu Majumdar capitalized on these sentiments of the people and started this movement. And also in 1972, when this issue of insurgency was very rapidly spreading across the country, the government of India took into custody Chadu Majumdar, and it also resulted in the death of Chadu Majumdar, and that also sparked off a very amount of spread of Naxalism and activities related to Naxalism around the country. And here we can see in 2007, right, almost these states which are marked in red were affected by this left-wing extremism, and that is why these states are also sometimes referred as red corridor, or the corridors where, or the states or the areas where this extremism is actually taking place between the local people. And since 1990s, the government have taken various efforts, very strict efforts, to totally eradicate left-wing extremism, LWE, at the very ground level, at the very local level. And in 2004, the CPI Maoist party was actually formed by the culmination of around 40 groups of, say, various states and their various insurgency units. And let me tell you, this is an institution which is still banned in the country as of now. Please do not, try to familiarize this with CPI Marxist, which is a registered political party in the country. We are talking about CPI Maoist, who actually believes in the ideology of the Mao. And here, this is actually a very violent group, or political group in the nation. And in 2006, it spread to around 200 districts, which were at its maximum level. And then the Prime Minister of India also told that the left-wing insurgency in the country is the prime threat to the country as of now. They used rocket launchers, they used AK-47s and whatnot against the Indian government. And also in 2010, the Dantewada attack in Chhattisgarh is infamously known for the massive amount of our own Indian security personnel who were actually killed in an ambush by the Maoists. And despite that, the government have taken various steps in this direction. Firstly, the government increased the presence of CRPF, NIA and ED in the various states where we actually have seen this red corridor, right? Then also the various state governments have sought to modernize their police forces, equipping themselves with technology of the state, better amount of identification and intelligence technology to identify the areas where they are actually operating. And let me tell you, this Naxalwadis and the Maoists, whatever you refer them to, they actually are present in heavily forested areas. And for them, the state government, particularly the police forces, they need a lot of amount of mobile towers. So that is why a lot of mobile towers were also erected in these areas. Then we have some successful examples of some successful state police operations against the Maoists. Firstly, when we look at the state of Andhra Pradesh, this movement is known as Greyhounds. Then Maharashtra local police fought with force, with their own police force known as the C-64s. In West Bengal, the police forces started to build confidence building measures, or started to initiate peace talks and doing constructive activities, development activities in the areas of Jangal Mahal. Then in Chhattisgarh, we had a particular initiative known as Salwa Juram, where the government, the state government, the police forces, they used to train some local people from this affected, Maoist affected regions to militate against the Maoists themselves. So this was known as Salwa Juram. Then the District Reserve Guard is also a very famous police force against these Maoist leaders. Then in Jharkhand, we have the Jharkhand Jaguars to combat the same. And in Odisha, interventions in Kodapur by the local police are also very well known, and a model of successful model against the insurgencies. Now we also have a central government scheme here known as Roshni to actually promote skill development in the LWE affected regions, and this is actually giving scaling imperatives to the people and to make them employable in the local sectors of employment, so they can move away from the violent activities and focus on their overall development. Finally, the Juvenile Justice Act in our country is also having some special provisions for children and in conflict with law. And when we are talking about this particular issue, in this insurgency, there are a lot of children which are actually radicalized from the very beginning, and they are used as weapons against the state. So once these insurgents are actually captured by the state police, right? So the children of the tomorrow, they should not be treated like the same manner as the seasoned criminals, right? So they must be given an opportunity to actually be protected from the various legal charges there, and that is why this Juvenile Justice Act is also taking care of the same by protecting the children in conflict with act and also children in need of care and protection by the state. And finally, the government of India has also a very, very innovative program known as the Aspirational Districts Program, where around the country, the government has selected some aspirational districts or districts which are lagging behind the rest of the districts in terms of human capital development, such as education, health, and other modes of, say, human dignity. So, and most of the Maoist affected areas and the districts are also included in this Aspirational Districts Program. And also, there is one very, very important initiative. You can quote this initiative in your mains answers, known as Samadhan. Now, Samadhan is a new operational doctrine where we have this amount of abbreviation and their full forms here. See, Samadhan, S stands for Smart Policing and Leadership. A stands for Aggressive Strategy. Then followed by motivation and training, actionable intelligence, dashboard for development and key performance indicators of the local people. Then we have harnessing technology for development of internal security. Then action plan for each theater, that is each district and their own set of challenges affected by this insurgency. And finally, no access to financing with respect to the Maoist groups, because we find they have huge access to financing, particularly held by countries such as China. And here we have to stop the access to money to actually combat this force here. So we have this amount of doctrine, so we can quote this in our mains answers too. Now we have to also look at the areas where the government is falling short. Now we can see here that the average yearly deaths which took place between 2000 to 2023, right, and the period between 2017 and 2022, we can see that the dates respect to the state personnel and the civilians, we can see that this is actually the recent trend here. So we have to also look at the some of the areas where the government is actually failing or passing behind. Now the first reason for the same is because sometimes it has been seen that the state governments, the various state governments, they sometimes tell that the insurgency issues are national issues, so our police forces are not always able to fight it back. So sometimes it has been seen that the state governments fall back in model, in responsibility in this struggle. Next, we also see that the whole of government approach is also missing on the ground. That means once a particular area has been rooted off Naxalism activities, now later it is the role of the state government, it is role of the center government to actually build some capable infrastructure such as schools, hospitals and roads, but it is not always seen here, right? That means that the collaboration between the central and the state governments and also various departments sometimes is not seen after the forces have been uprooted. So it is always seen that after a successful operation, again a new group of Maoists also crop up in the same place. Next, the reason is also political and also economical, and here the D. Bandyopadhyay committee of 2006 it gave 3 reasons why the government is also falling behind, because government is not particularly the state government is not able to give the basic solutions to the basic problems in this region, and also the main reason why the conflict was started in 1960s, that the main issue was poverty. The main issue is the lack of basic facilities in this region, right? And what happens is that the LWE agents and the leaders, they weaponize the people, they radicalize the people that, see, your government is not doing this for you, so you need to struggle against the government. And this is the mind washing that takes place, because these issues are there at the local level, and also the local people are actually in the dilemma. So when the government is taking some actions, they need the help of local people, but the local people is also, in the region where this local Maoist leaders also there. So they are always stuck between two boards. They cannot decide sometimes for the safety of their life and their family to what actually do. And also, we find the aspects of land alienation and displacement is also a very, very serious issue, because we see that most of these areas are forested regions, and also developmental activities such as tourism activities, such as forest conservation activities also taking place. And here the aspect of land alienation is very, very important, because sometimes it has been seen that sometimes the government takes away some land, forest land, for its own developmental purposes. And the next aspect is that the tribal people, the Adivasi people, they are also deprived of their own rights. So that is why this is a very, very important reason. Next, we also see we have seen the recent example of the Forest Conservation Act 2023, which is not very clear on the definition of forest. We have covered this in the previous analyst too. So it is not as to clear as to what the definition of forest is under 2023 amendment of the Forest Conservation Act. And recently the Supreme Court also highlighted this, and that is why we have seen that these kind of legislations also make the Adivasi people very unsure of the government intentions. And finally, we cannot ignore one thing, that is the inequality in the country. And here we see that the share of wealth with the top 1% of the population was actually 41%, around 40.1% in 2022-2023. So inequality is also a very, very important reason, right? Economic reasons are actually one of the main reasons, apart from the social reasons, why these areas are still prone to left-wing extremism. In the next one, we'll be looking at a government scheme known as the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban component. So here, 2 or more years have passed since the supposed completion of the scheme. And here in this article, we will be dividing this article into 2 parameters. Firstly, we'll be looking at the basics of the article, or the basics of the government scheme here. Secondly, we'll be trying to analyze what are the various shortcomings here. It is a very, very important piece of article and news for your economic and social development in prelims. For mains, we have to look at the various welfare schemes that the government has taken for the vulnerable sections of the population. Now here, we have to first look at the PMAY scheme here. Now, the features of this urban scheme is actually to giving all weather housing units with proper facilities of water, kitchen, electricity and toilet to a particular class of people. And the main ambition here is to providing housing for all kinds of people, to leave no one behind when it comes to the basic human dignity of having a dignified life under a shelter, under a roof. And that is why this is a centrally sponsored scheme, which is also trying to do many other things, such as providing adequate physical and social infrastructure to the people, assuring women empowerment by giving shelter to many families and many women ultimately. It is also promoting a better quality of life for the urban poor, because mostly they do not have a place to live, and if they do not, they live in slums and particularly on pavements of the streets too. And finally, to also give a security of tenure to the houses. That means it will be their own houses. They do not have to worry about the ownership rights too. And this is launched by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. And the main aspect here is to actually focus on the rehabilitation of the slum dwellers. In India, according to government records, it is at 40% of the urban areas, right? That means 40% of the urban population lives in the slums and in low quality areas. And according to World Bank, this data is even higher. It is at 49%. When the scheme was actually inaugurated, it was supposed to be completed by 2022, but now it has been extended to 2024, 31st of December. Now, this scheme has 4 components. That means the 4 kind of people will be benefiting from the particular scheme here. Firstly, the first component is known as beneficiary-led construction, where the scheme will be targeting the EWS and low-income categories. So here central assistance will be given to build houses on their own land. That means government will be giving money to various people here to build their own houses, and here the government will be giving subsidies that is up to 1.5 lakh for EWS, and for low income groups that will be given up to 1.5 lakh again. Second component is actually for the redevelopment of the slums, that is known as in situ redevelopment of slums. And here they will be focusing on slum redevelopment, that is properly building proper houses and facilities in the slum areas, and about also giving affordable basic amenities in the slums. Next, the third component is actually credit linked subsidies scheme, where the middle income category will be targeted, and they will be providing interest rate subsidies on their house loans that they have taken from their banks. So say the interest rate of the house loan is 10%. Now if you have taken a loan under this scheme, under this Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban scheme, you will be getting, for example, say discount of 5% on your interest rates, and it is applicable for purchase or construction of new houses. And finally, the fourth component is affordable housing in partnership, where the government will be collaborating with private sector to build affordable houses for the poorer sections. Now, we have to look at the performance of the scheme over the last 5 years. Over the last 5 years, the government has spent around $30 billion on this scheme. But again, we find that there is approx 20 million houses that we have found shortages in the rural areas. And in the urban areas, we find that we have a shortage of 3 million houses here. According to a recent study by ICRIER, the urban housing shortages have increased by 54% from 1.88 crore in 2012 to around 2.9 crore in 2018. So this means that the urban housing shortage is still there despite the scheme. And also, going on the website of this particular government scheme, on the dashboard of the same, we see that there is a shortfall of approx 40 lakh houses from those sanctioned and completed segments too. And only around 2.1 lakh houses have been sanctioned for eligible beneficiaries under the various 4 components. And also the report by a very prominent website known as News Laundry, it has told that this particular scheme has only addressed 25% of the housing shortages by only delivering 80 lakh homes. The other houses are also pending here. And families to be rehabilitated under the slum program of ISSR is just around 2.5% of the total beneficiaries. That means the author of this article is telling, according to the author, that this means that this in situ development of the slums component is not working properly. And here we have to look at the issues that is plaguing this particular scheme. Firstly, we have to understand the main issue is about money. The center's contribution of this entire scheme is only 25%, right? Most of the cost has to be borne by the beneficiaries themselves. That is up to 60%. And we understand these beneficiaries are from the EWS population, low income group, middle income group, and also the slum dwellers. So from where they can afford this 60% of the income, right? Next, the state government and the local urban area bodies, they're also contributing some, but it is not matching to the level of the beneficiaries. And we also have to understand that the vertical growth, or say the construction of ground floor, first floor, second floor, and so on, this kind of buildings, they require good amount of electricity, water services, gas services, and so on. And earlier, when the people used to live on their own in slums, right, they did not have to avail of these services because these services are mandatorily present in these living quarters. But these services also come with a cost. Right? So the cost of public utilities have actually gone up. Even after affording the houses, the people now have to pay higher bills. Now, the houses which are also offered in some of the components of this particular scheme is also very small. The living area and the bedroom and the kitchen are so small, it is so squeezed that the people are not encouraged to also take loans for this. Next, the land, particularly registered under airports, railways, etc., right, they cannot say be developed for the in situ slum rehabilitation because they face various bureaucratic hurdles and various regulatory challenges too. Next, we have to see that the ISSR plans are also not inclusive. That means they do not consult the communities who are living in the slums. They are actually consulted, or say they are actually been devised by the consultants, the professional consultants. And finally, we have to also look at the dichotomy which exists between the city's master plans and this particular scheme. For example, Delhi's DDA or Delhi Development Authority, right, and the issues it has with the various amount of plans with reference to Prime Minister's Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, right. So there are various various clashes when we talk about the expansion of the metro activities and the transportation activities. These activities clash with this particular scheme too. So these are all the issues that we need to sort out to hail the successful implementation of this scheme. In this article, we'll be looking at linkage coal, because recently coal-based thermal power plants can now use linkage coal to offer surplus power in the power market. The Ministry of Power recently has clarified. It's a very, very important article for your economic and social development part of prelims and GS3 infrastructure. Now, firstly, we have to understand that right now the summer is very, very hot, right, and we see across the India we are seeing such conditions that conditions are not livable, and that is why the people right now are purchasing coolers, fans, ACs and so on, which is demanding the increase of power. And that is why it is estimated that the peak power demand during the summers will be reaching a record of 260 gigawatts. Right, 260 gigawatts of power will be demanded entirely within this next 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And this is a very, very major challenge for the power sector of the country to actually supply power. Right, and also here, that is why recently the Ministry of Power has directed the coal power plants to actually use something which we know as linkage coal. Now here, according to section 9 subclause 5 of the Electricity Late Payment Surcharge and Related Matters Rules of 2022, now the thermal power plants can use the coal supply to long-term contracts to sell the surplus electricity in the market. Now when we understand long-term contracts, for example, say a coal thermal power plant may have a contract with a local company to offer them power over 10 years, right? Now say the company has told us I require around say 10 gigawatt of power every day, right? So you have to be supplying with me, right, for 10 years 10 gigawatts every day. So this is a long-term contract that this company has signed with the local thermal power company. Now here, suppose at one day, right, the thermal power company actually generated 15 gigawatts, right? Now there is 5 gigawatts which is extra, right? So now the thermal power plants, now they can sell this excess power to the national grid or to the rest of the consumers too, apart from this company, because this company only needs 10. Now they have produced 15, so this rest 5 can now be sold off in the market, because right now we see a lot of power demand, as you can see in this particular graph here. We see the deficit marked by the black circles here is growing over a period of time. And that is why the government has also taken some other steps. Firstly, the government has instructed the 15 imported coal-based thermal power plants to operate at full capacity till October 2024. And also the gas-based thermal power plants should be also be operational between May to June. That means the government is very, very concerned that the power demand may be so much that maybe the supply will not be keeping up. That is why the supply of power is actually being increased. And this is the concept of linkage coal, using long-term contracts to sell excess power in the market. Now we have to look at some of the important statistics here. See, the total installed power capacity in India is 416 gigawatts. The total coal capacity in India is 205 gigawatts. And we have seen in this that we will be reaching 260 gigawatts of power demand in 2024 itself. So where will be the rest of the power come from? The rest of the power should come from the diversification of power resources to the renewable sectors. And this is one main important reason why we need diversification. And also we have to look at some of the important coal statistics. We see when we look at the amount of coal production and imports, right, we see that this is the recent trend. And also when we look at the grade wise coal imports, we see that in India, right, we actually use more and more of non-coking and coking coal. So these are the things that we need to know here. In the next article, we'll be looking at a very, very important report by World Meteorological Organization. And here the name of the report is State of the Climate in Asia 2023. And here we'll be looking at this via various graphs and diagrams. Firstly, we'll be looking at the status of various amount of climate change activities in Asia, particularly through the various amount of extreme weather events such as floods, glacial outbursts, wildfire, extreme temperatures such as heat waves, storms, and landslides. And the deaths have been mainly, and most of the incidents that we see is actually from flood and storm events in Asia. And most of the deaths occur due to floods and also storm here. And most of the people who are affected, they are affected mostly by storms and floods again. And also when we look at the economic damage, mostly the damage is due to storms. So we see the storms and floods, they are a menace when we talk about the negative impacts of the climate change. And also when we look at the trends in the mean surface air temperature, right, we can see from 1901 to as of 2023, the mean air temperature across continents of Asia, Africa, and so on, they are increasing. And Asia is this continent here which is seeing a massive amount of increase over the last few years. Correct? Next, when we look at the other trends, we see that the melting of ice in various glaciers, right, located in various parts of Asia here, continent, we can see that the ice content is actually decreasing over a period of time. Also, when we look at the rainfall patterns over this area, we see that the pattern is also very, very erratic, where especially the parts of India is gradually seeing receding of rainfall over a period of time. And also when we look at the mean sea surface temperatures, right, recently we see that the sea surface temperatures are also increasing. So these are all the important aspects that you can take out from this report, right? You don't need to memorize any data, numbers, facts here. You just need to look at the trends so that you can quote these in your mains answers. Finally, we'll be looking at 4 important prelim snippets, and we'll be starting with the CPRE report, which is looking at the top 15 spenders when we look at the military expenditure that the countries all across the world have spent in 2023. The first country is the US, followed by China, followed by Russia, and we stand at 4th, right? Followed by Saudi Arabia, UK, Germany, Ukraine, France, Japan, and so on. So we see that we need to understand the recent trends and the rankings of India according to this CPRE report. And also we can see in this particular diagram here, the around say 30 to 40% of the military expenditure is entirely made by Americas, mainly by the US. Next, it is led by Asia. Countries such as China and India is responsible for military expenditure led by Asia, followed by Europe, Middle East, and Africa. In the next article, we'll be looking at adjusted gross revenue because recently the telecom services AGR rose 1.8% in December quarter. And also a recent case in the same is ongoing in the Supreme Court in the Indian judiciary. And here, this AGR is a levy on telecom operations in the India, and this is placed on the telecom operators. It is a type of a usage and a licensing fee that is to be paid to the Department of Telecommunications, divided into 2 types. Spectrum fee, the spectrum that the various telecom companies use for the transmission of its 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G services in the country, and also the license fee. Mainly the calculation of the AGR, according to the government, they are done in accordance of the all revenues of the telecom companies, including even the non-telecom sources such as interest on deposits or even the asset sales of the companies, right? But according to the telecom companies, which is actually a plea which is ongoing in the Supreme Court, according to them, the formula should be different. It should be only including the revenue generated only from the telecom services and not the non-telecom services. Mainly as of now, this is the official definition. If the Supreme Court changes the same, we'll be updating in the next analysis sessions also in the future. In the next article, we'll be looking at ethylene oxide because recently Singapore has recalled various brands of masala from the country, and this is because of the presence of a pesticide which is also recognized as group 1 carcinogen, or the agents which actually causes cancer. And this has been found in the various samples in the masala brands. And this is recognized by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And this ethylene oxide is used by the spice industry as a fumigant to actually reduce the number of microbial contamination, because this chemical kills bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And this is also very, very inflammable. This is a colorless and very reactive gas too. And it is also an industrial chemical. And when we talk about the damages and the ill benefits or And when we talk about the ill effects it does to the body, it damages the DNA during sterilization procedures. It increases the risk of cancers like leukemia, stomach cancer, and breast cancer. It can also lead to respiratory irritation, lung injury, headache, nausea, vomiting, and so on. And finally, we have to understand that it is also banned by the EU in 2011, whatever the exports that go into the EU from India, if it contains ethylene oxide. And finally, we have to conclude the session with no to ID. This is actually in reference. And finally, the last article of the day is no to ID. And in all cases of organ transplants, whether it is from a living donor or a deceased donor, they will be allocated a National Organ and Tissue Transplantation Organization ID to actually recognize both the donor and the recipients of various organs in the country. And this will be generated by the hospital from the NOTO website. And this is actually to eliminate the amount of illegal trafficking of organs in the country as of now. And NOTO ID is mandatory for considering the allocations of organs as of now in the country. And with this, I thank you all for attending the session. This was a very beautiful session talking to you all. Please do attempt the quiz which is following up here. All the best for your future endeavors till we meet again. Thank you.